When you hear the name Peaky Blinders, you probably picture the glamour of the roaring 20s, tailored suits, slow-motion walks through the smoke, and a family of untouchable criminals running the underground. But if you dropped into the real Birmingham criminal underworld in the 1920s, you wouldn't find them running the city. By that time, the actual gang had functionally vanished. The international smuggling rings, the political assassinations, and even the famous razor blades sewn into the brims of their caps are complete fiction. To uncover the terrifying truth of the men who actually ruled these streets, we have to leave the Hollywood glamour behind and step back into the soot-choked darkness of a much earlier era. Our story actually begins in the 1890s. This was the beating, grimy core of the British Industrial Revolution. Working-class life here was defined by severe inequality. The skyline was suffocated by smog spewing from massive, imposing red brick factories that demanded grueling labor. Down in the cramped slum alleyways, impoverished youth faced a world with absolutely no education and zero prospects. Out of that shared misery, violent groups known as slogging gangs began to form. These young men weren't plotting global syndicates. They were completely destitute, banding together out of a desperate need to simply survive another day. Which brings us to the most famous legend of all, the razor blades. It is a brilliant, bloody Hollywood invention, but it is entirely false. In the late 19th century, disposable safety razors were a rare luxury item. They were far too expensive for starving street thugs to casually waste in a pub brawl. The true name came from their obsession with fashion. Peaky referred to the traditional flat caps they wore, tilted down over one eye. And in Victorian slang, if you looked incredibly sharp, you were a blinder. These boys spent whatever coin they had on extravagant outfits. We're talking brass-buttoned waistcoats, bell-bottom trousers, and vibrant, ornate silk scarves. In a neighborhood swallowed by gray poverty, strutting down the cobblestones in immaculate tailoring was a highly visible insult directed squarely at the upper classes. The actual historical figures behind the myth were not masterminds, but brutal, heavy-handed enforcers. Their rap sheets are filled with petty offenses. They stole bicycles, ran illegal betting pitches, and launched violent assaults against locals using heavy belt buckles. Their reign was characterized entirely by localized, street-level terror. There was no grand strategy, no political maneuvering, and no global smuggling. Their grip on the slums started slipping in the 1910s. The city funded a larger, far less tolerant police force that began handing out exceptionally harsh prison sentences for street violence. But the final blow came from a real historical rival, a man named Billy Kimber and his organized syndicate, the Birmingham Boys. Kimber operated with a strictly professional, profit-driven mindset. He quickly realized that the chaotic, pride-based brawling of the old street gangs was terrible for business. Instead of fighting over alleyways, Kimber monopolized the highly lucrative racecourse betting rackets. The immense scale and staggering crowds at these tracks generated profits the old gangs couldn't even fathom. Facing this corporate, weaponized machine, the flashy Peaky Blinders were forcibly pushed into extinction. They were either absorbed into Kimber's mob, locked away, or simply left behind by progress. By the time the 1920s rolled around, the era we see on screen, the original gang was entirely gone. The name Peaky Blinder had become nothing more than a generic slang term for any young punk causing trouble in the city. Strip away the anti-heroes, the myth, and the mobster glamour. What you find is a harsh, unromantic tale of profound poverty and desperate survival. These destitute young men used violence and fashion to carve out a tiny sliver of respect in an industrial machine that offered them none. They were never fighting for a criminal empire. They were only ever fighting for their block.